Coffee was unknown, mostly, in Europe until the 17th century. The first to bring it were a few travelers that brought their own stash. But there are several sources attesting not only to the coffee trade via the European ports, but to the opening of several cafes by Armenians from New Jaffa. There exists poems in 1666 attesting that it was the Armenians that had given coffee its reputation in France. And there's even a line by a very famous Orientalist, Antoine Galland, who's known for the 1001 Nights, that says, yes, the travelers brought it in, but it's the Armenians who've made the reputation of coffee in France. Coffee is Ethiopian in origin. Once Ethiopia couldn't grow enough coffee, it started being grown in Yemen. And the first coffee traders were Arabs because coffee drinking was well established in the Ottoman Empire and in North Africa. There is a merchant by the name of Jean de la ROQUE who was opening the Yemen coffee trade for the French, who has written a history of coffee. And in that history of coffee, he names 5 Armenians as the 5 first cafe owners in Paris. And so that's the inception of coffee drinking in Paris, a town renowned for its cafes today. To know that the first 5 were Armenians from New Jaffa is very interesting. And he names them all. He names the streets. So one of the very first was a man named Pascal Harutun in Armenian. He's often called Pascal l'Arménien. He first starts serving coffee at a fair in Saint-Germain. It's a fair for novelties. Then he opens a cafe in 1671, Rue du Louvre in Paris. It's a small cafe. It's the very first, but it's followed by several others. Now, if you look at the guides of Paris, it will tell you that the first Paris cafe is the Procope. The Procope exists today. The Procope was opened by Procopio Cortelli, an Italian, because coffee drinking was better known in Italy. But Procopio had worked with Pascal. Around the same period, the Ottoman ambassador went to the court of Louis XIV. And cafes happened more or less around the same time. So different groups of people were exposed to coffee in different ways. The elite through the Ottoman ambassador in 1669 and the population of Paris through the Armenian cafes. Equally in Vienna, the first 2 cafes were opened by 2 Armenians. Deodato was the name of one, and Isaac de Luca was the other. Isaac de Luca was even given the monopoly of coffee exports into Vienna by Leopold I. In France, however, these cafe owners never had permission. They could do it because coffee was a new commodity and it wasn't part of the guilds. Even in 1692, there's a treatise by Odige that complains about the success of the Armenians in opening cafes in Paris. Louis XIV, seeing that coffee was profitable, seeing that it was mainly Ottoman and Armenian merchants that were bringing it into France via Marseille, decided that the import of coffee into France was important. He gave that monopoly to a Frenchman by the name of François d'Amam by decree the 12th of March, 1693. At that point, anyone opening a cafe had to get his permission because he put the cafes under the guilds. But of course, the guilds make it biased towards a local population already established in the guild system. Once coffee selling had become part of the guilds, the Armenians become scarce. The recipe for coffee, whether it was in Paris, Vienna, or elsewhere, was the Oriental recipe, still drunk today. People call it Arabic, Turkish, Armenian, Greek coffee. If you look at the 17th century recipes, they're based on these first recipes brought there. And this was a new habit, a completely new habit for the Viennese, the Parisians. There wasn't a very big market at that point in Europe. Coffee wasn't the global commodity it is now. Basically, it was an important commodity in the Muslim world, but the quantities coming to Europe in the 17th century were not enormous. These first cafes really changed the social life of two major cities, such as Vienna and Paris, who are becoming important cities for cafe life and still are today. I found it very interesting to have these initial cafes opened by Armenians from New Jaffa. But it's not astonishing because they're cross-cultural transmitters. They knew of coffee drinking because in Isfahan, in Istanbul, in Cairo, cafes were established a century before that. So they're only transmitting something that they are familiar with.